LETTER LVIII of Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Vol. 8. This is the LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nicole Lee. Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Vol. 8, by Samuel Richardson. LETTER LVIII. Dr. H. to James Harlowe, Senior, Esquire, London, September 4th. Sir, if I may judge of the hearts of other parents by my own, I cannot doubt but you will take it well to be informed that you have yet an opportunity to save yourself and family great future regret, by dispatching hither some one of it with your last blessing, and your lady's, to the most excellent of her sex. I have some reason to believe, Sir, that she has been represented to you in a very different light from the true one. And this it is that induces me to acquaint you, that I think her, on the best grounds, absolutely irreproachable in all her conduct which has passed under my eye, or come to my ear; and that her very misfortunes are made glorious to her, and honourable to all that are related to her, by the use she has made of them, and by the patience and resignation with which she supports herself in a painful, lingering, and dispiriting decay, and by the greatness of mind with which she views her approaching dissolution; and all this from proper motives, from motives in which a dying saint might glory. She knows not that I write. I must indeed acknowledge that I offered to do so some days ago, and that very pressingly; nor did she refuse me from obstinacy, she seemed not to know what that is; but desired me to forbear for 2 days only, in hopes that her newly arrived cousin, who, as she heard, was soliciting for her, would be able to succeed in her favour. I hope I shall not be thought an officious man on this occasion; but if I am, I cannot help it, being driven to write by a kind of parental and irresistible impulse. But, Sir, whatever you think fit to do, or permit to be done, must be speedily done; for she cannot, I verily think, live a week; and how long of that short space she may enjoy her admirable intellects to take comfort in the favours you may think proper to confer upon her, cannot be said. I am, Sir, your most humble servant, R.H. End of Letter LVIII. LETTER LIX of Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Vol. 8. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nicole Lee. Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Vol. 8, by Samuel Richardson. LETTER LIX. Mr. Belford to William Morden, Esquire, London, September 4th. Sir, the urgency of the case, and the opportunity by your servant, will sufficiently apologize for this trouble from a stranger to your person, who, however, is not a stranger to your merit. I understand you are employing your good offices with the parents of Miss Clarissa Harlowe and other relations, to reconcile them to the most meritorious daughter and kinswoman that ever family had to boast of. Generously as this is intended by you, we here have too much reason to think all your solicitudes on this head will be unnecessary; for it is the opinion of every one who has the honour of being admitted to her presence, that she cannot live over 3 days; so that if you wish to see her alive, you must lose no time to come up. She knows not that I write. I had done it sooner, if I had had the least doubt that before now she would not have received from you some news of the happy effects of your kind mediation in her behalf. I am, Sir, your most humble servant, J. Belford. End of Letter LIX. LETTER LX of Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Vol. 8. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nicole Lee. Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Vol. 8, by Samuel Richardson. LETTER LX. Mr. Lovelace to John Belford, Esquire, Uxbridge, Tuesday morning, between 4 and 5. And can it be, that this admirable creature will so soon leave this cursed world? For cursed I shall think it, and more cursed myself, when she is gone. O Jack! Thou who canst sit so cool, and, like Addison's angel, direct and even enjoy the storm, that tears up my happiness by the roots, blame me not for my impatience, however unreasonable. If thou knowest, that already I feel the torments of the damned, in the remorse that wrings my heart, on looking back upon my past actions by her, thou wouldst not be the devil thou art, to halloo on a worrying conscience, which, without my merciless aggravations, is altogether intolerable. I know not what to write, nor what I would write. When the company that used to delight me is as uneasy to me as my reflections are painful, and I can neither help nor divert myself, must not every servant about me partake in a perturbation so sincere? Shall I give thee a faint picture of the horrible uneasiness with which my mind struggles? And faint indeed it must be; for nothing but outrageous madness can exceed it; and that only in the apprehension of others; since, as to the sufferer, it is certain, that actual distraction, take it out of its lucid intervals, must be an infinitely more happy state than the state of suspense and anxiety which often brings it on. Forbidden to attend the dear creature, yet longing to see her, I would give the world to be admitted once more to her beloved presence. I ride towards London 3 or 4 times a day, resolving pro and con 20 times in 2 or 3 miles, and at last ride back; and, in view of Uxbridge, loathing even the kind friend, and hospitable house, turn my horse's head again towards the town, and resolve to gratify my humour, let her take it as she will; but at the very entrance of it, after infinite canvassings, once more alter my mind, dreading to offend and shock her, lest, by that means, I should curtail a life so precious. Yesterday, in particular, to give you an idea of the strength of that impatience which I cannot avoid suffering to break out upon my servants, I had no sooner dispatched Will. than I took horse to meet him on his return. In order to give him time, I loitered about on the road, riding up this lane to the one highway, down that to the other, just as my horse pointed, all the way cursing my very being, and though so lately looking down upon all the world, wishing to change conditions with the poorest beggar that cried to me for charity as I rode by him, and throwing him money, in hopes to obtain by his prayers the blessing my heart pants after. After I had sauntered about an hour or 2, which seemed 3 or 4 tedious ones, fearing I had slipped the fellow, I inquired at every turnpike, whether a servant in such a livery had not passed through in his return from London, on a full gallop; for woe had been to the dog had I met him on a sluggish trot; and lest I should miss him at one end of Kensington, as he might take either the Acton or Hammersmith road, or at the other, as he might come through the park, or not, how many score times did I ride backwards and forwards from the palace to the Gore, making myself the subject of observation to all passengers, whether on horseback or on foot, who no doubt wondered to see a well-dressed and well-mounted man, sometimes ambling, sometimes prancing, as the beast had more fire than his master, backwards and forwards in so short a compass. Yet all this time, though longing to espy the fellow, did I dread to meet him, lest he should be charged with fatal tidings. When at distance I saw any man galloping towards me, my resemblance forming fancy immediately made it to be him, and then my heart choked me. But when the person's nearer approach undeceived me, how did I curse the varlet's delay, and thee by turns! And how ready was I to draw my pistol at the stranger for having the impudence to gallop, which none but my messenger, I thought, had either right or reason to do. For all the business of the world, I am ready to imagine, should stand still on an occasion so melancholy and so interesting to me. Nay, for this week past, I could cut the throat of any man or woman I see laugh, while I am in such dejection of mind. I am now convinced that the wretches who fly from a heavy scene labour under 10 times more distress in the intermediate suspense and apprehension than they could have were they present at it, and to see and know the worst. So capable is fancy or imagination, the more immediate offspring of the soul, to outgo fact, let the subject be either joyous or grievous. And hence, as I conceive, it is, that all pleasures are greater in the expectation or in the reflection than in fruition, as all pains, which press heavy upon both parts of that unequal union by which frail mortality holds its precarious tenure, are ever most acute in the time of suffering. For how easy sit upon the reflection the heaviest misfortunes, when surmounted! But most easy, I confess, those in which body has more concern than soul. This, however, is a point of philosophy I have neither time nor head just now to weigh, so take it as it falls from a madman's pen. Woe be to either of the wretches who shall bring me the fatal news that she is no more! For it is but too likely that a shriek owl so hated will never hoot or scream again, unless the shock, that will probably disorder my whole frame on so sad an occasion, by unsteadying my hand, shall divert my aim from his head, heart, or bowels, if it turn not against my own. But surely she will not. She cannot yet die. Such a matchless excellence, whose mind contains a world, and seems for all things framed, could not be lent to be so soon demanded back again. But may it not be that thou, Belford, art in a plot with the dear creature, who will not let me attend her to convince myself, in order to work up my soul to the deepest remorse, and that, when she is convinced of the sincerity of my penitence, and when my mind is made such wax as to be fit to take what impression she pleases to give it, she will then raise me up with the joyful tidings of her returning health and acceptance of me? What would I give to have it so! And when the happiness of hundreds, as well as the peace and reconciliation of several eminent families, depend upon her restoration and happiness, why should it not be so? But let me presume it will. Let me indulge my former hope, however improbable. I will, and enjoy it too. And let me tell thee how ecstatic my delight would be on the unravelling of such a plot as this. Do, dear Belford, let it be so. And, O my dearest and ever dear Clarissa, keep me no longer in this cruel suspense, in which I suffer 1,000 times more than ever I made thee suffer, nor fear thou that I will resent or recede on an éclaircissement so desirable. For I will adore thee for ever, and without reproaching thee for the pangs thou hast tortured me with, confess thee as much my superior in virtue and honour. But once more, should the worst happen, say not what that worst is, and I am gone from this hated island, gone for ever, and may eternal but I am crazed already, and will therefore conclude myself, thine more than my own, and no great compliment neither, R.L. End of Letter 60. Letter 61 of Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 8. This is the LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nicole Lee. Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 8, by Samuel Richardson. Letter 61. Mr. Belford to Robert Lovelace, Esq. Tuesday, September 9th, in the morning, at Mr. Smith's. When I read yours of this morning, I could not help pitying you for the account you give of the dreadful anxiety and suspense you labour under. I wish from my heart all were to end as you are so willing to hope, but it will not be; and your suspense, if the worst part of your torment, as you say it is, will soon be over: but, alas! in a way you wish not. I attended the lady just now. She is extremely ill. Yet is she aiming at an answer to her Norton's letter, which she began yesterday in her own chamber, and has written a good deal, but in a hand not like her own fine one, as Mrs. Lovick tells me, but larger, and the lines crooked. I have accepted of the offer of a room adjoining to the widow Lovick's, till I see how matters go, but unknown to the lady, and I shall go home every night for a few hours. I would not lose a sentence that I could gain from lips so instructive, nor the opportunity of receiving any command from her, for an estate. In this my new apartment I now write, and shall continue to write, as occasions offer, that I may be the more circumstantial. But I depend upon the return of my letters, or copies of them, on demand, that I may have together all that relates to this affecting story, which I shall reperuse with melancholy pleasure to the end of my life. I think I will send thee Brand's letter to Mr. John Harlowe, recanting his base surmises. It is a matchless piece of pedantry, and may perhaps a little divert thy deep chagrin. Some time hence at least it may, if not now. What wretched creatures are there in the world! What strangely mixed creatures! So sensible and so silly at the same time! What a various, what a foolish creature is man! 3 o'clock. The lady has just finished her letter, and has entertained Mrs. Lovick, Mrs. Smith, and me, with a noble discourse on the vanity and brevity of life, to which I cannot do justice in the repetition. And indeed I am so grieved for her, that, ill as she is, my intellects are not half so clear as hers. A few things which made the strongest impression upon me, as well from the sentiments themselves as from her manner of uttering them, I remember. She introduced them thus: I am thinking, said she, what a gradual and happy death God Almighty, blessed be his name, affords me. Who would have thought that, suffering what I have suffered, and abandoned as I have been, with such a tender education as I have had, I should be so long a dying? But see now, by little and little, it had come to this. I was first take off from the power of walking. Then I took a coach. A coach grew too violent an exercise. Then I took up a chair. The prison was a large death stride upon me. I should have suffered longer else. Next, I was unable to go to church. Then to go up or down stairs. Now hardly can move from one room to another, and a less room will soon hold me. My eyes begin to fail me, so that at times I cannot see to read distinctly. And now I can hardly write or hold a pen. Next, I presume, I shall know nobody, nor be able to thank any of you. I therefore now once more thank you, Mrs. Lovick, and you, Mrs. Smith, and you, Mr. Belford, well I can thank you, for all your kindness to me. And thus by little and little, in such a gradual sensible death as I am blessed with, God dies away in us, as I may say, all human satisfaction, in order to subdue his poor creatures to himself. Thou mayest guess how affected we all were at this moving account of her progressive weakness. We heard it with wet eyes: for what with the women's example, and what with her moving eloquence, I could no more help it than they. But we were silent nevertheless, and she went on, applying herself to me. O Mr. Belford, this is a poor transitory life in the best enjoyments. We flutter about here and there with all our vanities about us, like painted butterflies, for a gay, but a very short season, till at last we lay ourselves down in a quiescent state, and turn into vile worms. and who knows in what form, or to what condition, we shall rise again? I wish you would permit me, a young creature, just turned of 19 years of age, blooming and healthy as I was a few months ago, now nipped by the cold hand of death, to influence you, in these my last hours, to a life of regularity and repentance for any past evils you may have been guilty of. For believe me, Sir, that now, in this last stage, very few things will bear the test, or be passed as laudable, if pardonable, at our own bar; much less at a more tremendous one, in all we have done, or delighted in, even in a life not very offensive neither, as we may think. Ought we not then to study in our full day, before the dark hours approach, so to live, as may afford reflections that will soften the agony of the last moments when they come, and let in upon the departing soul a ray of divine mercy to illuminate its passage into an awful eternity? She was ready to faint; and, choosing to lie down, I withdrew, I need not say with a melancholy heart: and when I got to my new taken apartment, my heart was still more affected by the sight of the solemn letter the admirable lady had so lately finished. It was communicated to me by Mrs. Lovick, who had it to copy for me; but it was not to be delivered to me till after her departure. However, I trespassed so far, as to prevail upon the widow to let me take a copy of it, which I did directly in character. I send it enclosed. If thou canst read it, and thy heart not bleed at thy eyes, thy remorse can hardly be so deep as thou hast inclined me to think it is. End of Letter 61. Letter 62 of Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Vol. 8. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nicole Lee. Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Vol. 8, by Samuel Richardson. Letter 62. Miss Clarissa Harlowe to Mrs. Norton. Begun on Monday, September 4th, and by piecemeal finished on Tuesday, but not sent till the Thursday following. My dearest Mrs. Norton, I am afraid I shall not be able to write all that is upon my mind to say to you upon the subject of your last, yet I will try. As to my friends, and as to the sad breakfasting, I cannot help being afflicted for them. What, alas, has not my mother in particular suffered by my rashness? Yet to allow so much for a son, so little for a daughter! But all now will soon be over, as to me. I hope they will bury all their resentments in my grave. As to your advice in relation to Mr. Belford, let me only say, that the unhappy reprobation I have met with, and my short time, must be my apology now. I wish I could have written to my mother and my uncles, as you advise; and yet favours come so slowly from them. The granting of one request only now remains as a desirable one from them, which, nevertheless, when granted, I shall not be sensible of. It is that they will be pleased to permit my remains to be laid with those of my ancestors, placed at the feet of my dear grandfather, as I have mentioned in my will. This, however, as they please. For, after all, this vile body ought not so much to engage my cares. It is a weakness; but let it be called a natural weakness, and I shall be excused, especially when a reverential gratitude shall be known to be the foundation of it. You know, my dear woman, how my grandfather loved me; and you know how much I honoured him, and that from my very infancy to the hour of his death. How often since have I wished that he had not loved me so well! I wish not now, at the writing of this, to see even my cousin Morden. O my blessed woman! My dear maternal friend! I am entering upon a better tour than to France or Italy either, or even than to settle at my once beloved dairy house. All these prospects and pleasures, which used to be so agreeable to me in health, how poor seem they to me now! Indeed, my dear Mamma Norton, I shall be happy. I know I shall. I have charming forebodings of happiness already. Tell all my dear friends, for their comfort, that I shall. Who would not bear the punishments I have borne, to have the prospects and assurances I rejoice in? Assurances I might not have had, were my own wishes to have been granted to me. Neither do I want to see even you, my dear Mrs. Norton. Nevertheless, I must, in justice to my own gratitude, declare, that there was a time, could you have been permitted to come, without incurring displeasure from those whose esteem it is necessary for you to cultivate and preserve, that your presence and comfortings would have been balm to my wounded mind. But were you now, even by consent, and with reconciliatory tidings to come, it would but add to your grief; and the sight of one I so dearly love, so happily fraught with good news, might but draw me back to wishes I have had great struggles to get above. And let me tell you, for your comfort, that I have not left undone any thing that ought to be done, either respecting mind or person; no, not to the minutest preparation; so that nothing is left for you to do for me. Every one has her direction as to the last offices; and my desk, that I now write upon, O my dearest Mrs. Norton, all is provided, all is ready, and all will be as decent as it should be. And pray let my Miss Howe know, that by the time you will receive this, and she your signification of the contents of it, will, in all probability, be too late for her to do me the inestimable favour, as I should once have thought it, to see me. God will have no rivals in the hearts of those he sanctifies. By various methods he deadens all other sensations, or rather absorbs them all in the love of him. I shall nevertheless love you, my Mamma Norton, and my Miss Howe, whose love to me has passed the love of woman, to my latest hour. But yet I am now above the quick sense of those pleasures which once delighted me, and once more I say, that I do not wish to see objects so dear to me, which might bring me back again into sense, and rival my supreme love. Twice have I been forced to leave off. I wished that my last writing might be to you or to Miss Howe, if it might not be to my dearest Mamma, I would have wrote. Is the word distinct? My eyes are so misty. If, when I apply to you, I break off in half words, do you supply them. The kindest are your due. Be sure take the kindest, to fill up chasms with, if any chasms there be. Another breaking off. But the new day seems to rise upon me with healing in its wings. I have gotten, I think, a recruit of strength. Spirits, I bless God, I have not of late wanted. Let my dearest Miss Howe purchase her wedding garments, and may all temporal blessings attend the charming preparation. Blessings will, I make no question, notwithstanding the little cloudiness that Mr. Hickman encounters with now and then, which are but prognostications of a future golden day to him, for her heart is good, and her head not wrong. But great merit is coy, and that coyness had not always its foundation in pride. But if it should seem to be pride, take off the skin-deep covering, and in her it is noble diffidence, and a love that wants but to be assured. Tell Mr. Hickman I write this, and write it, as I believe, with my last pen, and bid him bear a little at first, and forbear, and all the future will be crowning gratitude, and rewarding love. For Miss Howe had great sense, fine judgment, and exalted generosity. And can such a one be ungrateful or easy, under those obligations which his assiduity and obligingness, when he shall be so happy as to call her his, will lay her under to him? As for me, never bride was so ready as I am. My wedding garments are bought, and though not fine or gaudy to the sight, though not adorned with jewels, and set off with gold and silver, for I have no beholder's eyes to wish to glitter in, yet will they be the easiest, the happiest suit that ever bridal maiden wore. For they are such as carry with them a security against all those anxieties, pains, and perturbations, which sometimes succeed to the most promising outsettings. And now, my dear Mrs. Norton, do I wish for no other. O hasten, good God, if it be thy blessed will, the happy moment that I am to be decked out in his all-quieting garb; and sustain, comfort, bless, and protect with the all-shadowing wing of thy mercy my dear parents, my uncles, my brother, my sister, my cousin Morden, my ever dear and ever kind Miss Howe, my good Mrs. Norton, and every deserving person to whom they wish well, is the ardent prayer, first and last, of every beginning hour, as the clock tells it me, hours now are days, nay, years, of your now not sorrowing or afflicted, but happy Clarissa Harlowe. End of Letter 62. Letter 63 of Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 8. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nicole Lee. Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 8, by Samuel Richardson. Letter 63. Mr. Lovelace to John Belford, Esq. Wednesday morning, September 6, half an hour after 3. I am not the savage which you and my worst enemies think me. My soul is too much penetrated by the contents of the letter which you enclosed in your last, to say one word more to it, than that my heart has bled over it from every vein. I will fly from the subject. But what other can I choose that will not be as grievous, and lead into the same? I could quarrel with all the world, with thee as well as the rest, obliging as thou supposest thyself for writing to me hourly. How darest thou, though unknown to her, to presume to take an apartment under the same roof with her? I cannot bear to think that thou shouldst be seen at all hours passing to and repassing from her apartments, while I, who have so much reason to call her mine, and one was preferred by her to all the world, am forced to keep aloof, and hardly dare to enter the city where she is. If there be any thing in Brand's letter that will divert me, hasten it to me. But nothing now will ever divert me, will ever again give me joy or pleasure. I can neither eat, drink, nor sleep. I am sick of all the world. Surely it will be better when all is over, when I know the worst the fates can do against me. Yet how shall I bear that worst? O Belford, Belford, write it not to me! But if it must happen, get somebody else to write; for I shall curse the pen, the hand, the head, and the heart, employed in communicating to me the fatal tidings. But what is this saying, when already I curse the whole world except her, myself most? In fine, I am a most miserable being. Life is a burden to me. I would not bear it upon these terms for 1 week more, let what would be my lot: for already is there a hell begun in my own mind. Never more mention it to me. Let her, or who will say it, the prison, I cannot bear it. May damnation seize quick the cursed woman, who could set death upon taking that large stride, as the dear creature calls it. I had no hand in it. But her relations, her implacable relations, have done the business. All else would have been got over. Never persuade me but it would. The fire of youth, and the violence of passion, would have pleaded for me to good purpose with an individual of a sex which loves to be addressed with passionate ardour, even to tumult, had it not been for that cruelty and unforgivingness which, the object and the penitence considered, have no example, and have aggravated the heinousness of my faults. Unable to rest, though I went not to bed till 2, I dispatched this ere the day dawn. Who knows what this night, this dismal night, may have produced? I must after my messenger. I have told the varlet I will meet him, perhaps at Knightsbridge, perhaps in Piccadilly: and I trust not myself with pistols, not only on his account, but my own; for pistols are too ready a mischief. I hope thou hast a letter ready for him. He goes to thy lodgings first: for surely thou wilt not presume to take thy rest in an apartment near hers. If he miss thee there, he flies to Smith's, and brings me word whether in being or not. I shall look for him through the air as I ride, as well as on horseback: for if the prince of it serve me as well as I have served him, he will bring the dog by his ears, like another Habakkuk, to my saddle bow, with the tidings that my heart pants after. Nothing but the excruciating pangs the condemned soul feels, at its entrance into the eternity of the torments we are taught to fear, can exceed what I now feel, and have felt for almost this week past: and mayst thou have a spice of those, if thou hast not a letter ready written for thy Lovelace. End of Letter 63. Letter 64 of Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Vol. 8. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nicole Lee. Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Vol. 8. By Samuel Richardson. Letter 64. Mr. Belford to Robert Lovelace, Esq. Tuesday, September 5th, 6 o'clock. The lady remains exceedingly weak and ill. Her intellects, nevertheless, continue clear and strong, and her piety and patience are without example. Every one thinks this night will be her last. What a shocking thing is that to say of such an excellence! She will not, however, send away her letter to her Norton as yet. She endeavoured in vain to superscribe it; so desired me to do it. Her fingers will not hold the pen with the requisite steadiness. She has, I fear, written and read her last. 8 o'clock. She is somewhat better than she was. The doctor had been here, and thinks she will hold out yet a day or 2. He has ordered her, as for some time past, only some little cordials to take when ready to faint. She seemed disappointed when he told her she might yet live 2 or 3 days, and said she longed for dismission. Life was not so easily extinguished, she saw, as some imagined. Death from grief was, she believed, the slowest of deaths. But God's will must be done. Her only prayer was now for submission to it; for she doubted not but by the divine goodness she should be an happy creature, as soon as she could be divested of these rags of mortality. Of her own accord she mentioned you, which till then she had avoided to do. She asked, with great serenity, where you were. I told her where, and your motives for being so near, and read to her a few lines of yours of this morning, in which you mention your wishes to see her, your sincere affliction, and your resolution not to approach her without her consent. I would have read more; but she said, Enough, Mr. Belford, enough. Poor man, does his conscience begin to find him? Then need not any body to wish him a greater punishment. May it work upon him to an happy purpose. I took the liberty to say, that as she was in such a frame that nothing now seemed capable of discomposing her, I could wish that you might have the benefit of her exhortations, which, I dared to say, while you were so seriously affected, would have a greater force upon you than 1,000 sermons; and how happy you would think yourself, if you could but receive her forgiveness on your knees. How can you think of such a thing, Mr. Belford? Said she, with some emotion. My composure is owing, next to the divine goodness blessing my earnest supplications for it, to the not seeing him. Yet let him know that I now again repeat, that I forgive him: and may God Almighty, clasping her fingers, and lifting up her eyes, forgive him too, and perfect repentance, and sanctify it to him. Tell him I say so: and tell him, that if I could not say so with my whole heart, I should be very uneasy, and think that my hopes of mercy were but weakly founded, and that I had still, in my harboured resentment, some hankerings after a life which he has been the cause of shortening. The divine creature then turning aside her head, Poor man! said she, I once could have loved him. This is saying more than ever I could say of any other man out of my own family. Would he have permitted me to have been an humble instrument to have made him good, I think I could have made him happy. But tell him not this: if he be really penitent, it may too much affect him. There she paused. Admirable creature! Heavenly forgiver! Then resuming, But pray tell him, that if I could know that my death might be a mean to reclaim and save him, it would be an inexpressible satisfaction to me. But let me not, however, be made uneasy with the apprehension of seeing him. I cannot bear to see him. Just as she had done speaking, the minister, who had so often attended her, sent up his name, and was admitted. Being apprehensive that it would be with difficulty that you could prevail upon that impetuous spirit of yours not to invade her in her dying hours, and of the agonies into which a surprise of this nature would throw her, I thought this gentleman's visit afforded a proper opportunity to renew the subject, and having asked her leave, acquainted him with the topic we had been upon. The good man urged that some condescensions were usually expected, on these solemn occasions, from pious souls like hers, however satisfied with themselves, for the sake of showing the world, and for example's sake, that all resentments against those who had most injured them were subdued. And if she would vouchsafe to a heart so truly penitent, as I had represented Mr. Lovelace's to be, that personal pardon, which I had been pleading for, there would be no room to suppose the least lurking resentment remained, and it might have very happy effects upon the gentleman. I have no lurking resentment, Sir, said she. This is not a time for resentment. And you will be the readier to believe me when I can assure you, looking at me, that even what I have most rejoiced in, the truly friendly love that has so long subsisted between my Miss Howe and her Clarissa, although to my last gasp it will be the dearest to me of all that is dear in this life, has already abated of its fervour, has already given place to supremer fervours. And shall the remembrance of Mr. Lovelace's personal insults, which I bless God never corrupted that mind which her friendship so much delighted, be stronger in these hours with me, than the remembrance of a love as pure as the human heart ever boasted? Tell therefore the world, if you please, and, if, Mr. Belford, you think what I said to you before not strong enough, tell the poor man, that I not only forgive him, but have such earnest wishes for the good of his soul, and that from consideration of its immortality, that could my penitence avail for more sins than my own, my last tear should fall for him by whom I die. Our eyes and hands expressed to us both what our lips could not utter. Say not then, proceeded she, nor let it be said, that my resentments are unsubdued. And yet these eyes, lifted up to heaven as witness to the truth of what I have said, shall never, if I can help it, behold him more. For do you not consider, Sirs, how short my time is, what much more important subjects I have to employ it upon, and how unable I should be, so weak as I am, to contend even with the avowed penitence of a person in strong health, governed by passions unabated, and always violent? And now I hope you will never urge me more on this subject. The minister said it were pity ever to urge this plea again. You see, Lovelace, that I did not forget the office of a friend, in endeavouring to prevail upon her to give you her last forgiveness personally. And I hope, as she is so near her end, you will not invade her in her last hours, since she must be extremely discomposed at such an interview, and it might make her leave the world the sooner for it. This reminds me of an expression which she used on your barbarous hunting of her at Smith's, on her return to her lodgings, and that with a serenity unexampled, as Mrs. Lovick told me, considering the occasion, and the trouble given her by it, and her indisposition at the time. He will not let me die decently, said the angelic sufferer. He will not let me enter into my Maker's presence with the composure that is required in entering into the drawing-room of an earthly prince. I cannot, however, forbear to wish that the heavenly creature could have prevailed upon herself in these her last hours to see you, and that for my sake as well as yours. For although I am determined never to be guilty of the crimes which, till within these few past weeks, have blackened my former life, and for which at present I most heartily hate myself, yet should I be less apprehensive of such a relapse, if wrought upon by the solemnity which such an interview must have been attended with, you had become a reformed man. For no devil do I fear but one in your shape. It is now 11 o'clock at night. The lady, who retired to rest an hour ago, is, as Mrs. Lovick tells me, in a sweet slumber. I will close here. I hope I shall find her the better for it in the morning. Yet, alas, how frail is hope! How frail is life! When we are apt to build so much on every shadowy relief, although in such a desperate case as this, sitting down to reflect, we must know that it is but shadowy. I will enclose Brand's horrid pedantry, and for once am aforehand with thy ravenous impatience. End of Letter 64. Letter 65 of Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 8. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nicole Lee. Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 8, by Samuel Richardson. Letter 65. Mr. Brand to Mr. John Walton, Saturday night, September 2nd. Dear Mr. Walton, I am obliged to you for the very handsomely penned, and elegantly written, letter which you have sent me on purpose to do justice to the character of the younger Miss Harlowe. And yet I must tell you that I had reason, before that came, to think, and to know, indeed, that we were all wrong. And so I had employed the greatest part of this week in drawing up an apologetical letter to my worthy patron, Mr. John Harlowe, in order to set all matters right between me and them, and, as far as I could, between them and Miss. So it required little more than connection and transcribing when I received yours, and it will be with Mr. Harlowe aforesaid to-morrow morning, and this and the copy of that will be with you on Monday morning. You cannot imagine how sorry I am that you and Mrs. Walton and Mrs. Barker and I myself should have taken matters up so lightly, judging, alas a day, by appearance and conjecture, where character and reputation are concerned. Horace says truly, et semel emissum volat irrevocabile verbum. That is, words once spoken cannot be recalled. But, Mr. Walton, they may be contradicted by other words, and we may confess ourselves guilty of a mistake, and express our concern for being mistaken, and resolve to make our mistake a warning to us for the future. And this is all that can be done, and what every worthy mind will do, and what nobody can be readier to do than we four undesigning offenders, as I see by your letter on your part, and as you will see by the enclosed copy on mine, which, if it be received as I think it ought, and as I believe it will, must give me a speedy opportunity to see you when I visit the lady, to whom, as you will see in it, I expect to be sent up with the olive branch. The matter in which we all erred must be owned to be very nice, and Mr. Belford's character considered, appearances ran very strong against the lady. But all that this serveth to show is, that in doubtful matters the wisest people may be mistaken, for so saith the poet, fallitur in dubiis hominum solatier rebus. If you have an opportunity, you may, as if from yourself, and unknown to me, show the enclosed to Mr. Belford, who, you tell me, resenteth the matter very heinously, but not to let him see or hear read those words that relate to him in the paragraph at the bottom of the second page, beginning, but yet I do insist upon it, to the end of that paragraph, for one would not make oneself enemies, you know, and I have reason to think that this Mr. Belford is as passionate and fierce a man as Mr. Lovelace. What pity it is the lady could find no worthier a protector! You may paste those lines over with blue or black paper before he seeth it, and if he insisteth upon taking a copy of my letter, for he or any body that seeth it or heareth it read will no doubt be glad to have by them the copy of a letter so full of the sentiments of the noblest writers of antiquity, and so well adapted, as I will be bold to say they are, to the point in hand. I say, if he insisteth upon taking a copy. Let him give you the strongest assurances not to suffer it to be printed on any account, and I make the same request to you that you will not, For if anything be to be made of a man's works, who but the author should have the advantage? And if the Spectators, the Tattlers, the Examiners, the Guardians, and other of our polite papers, make such a strutting with a single verse, or so by way of motto, in the front of each day's paper, and if other authors pride themselves in finding out and embellishing the title pages of their books with a verse or adage from the classical writers, what a figure would such a letter as the enclosed make, so full fraught with admirable precepts and apropos quotations from the best authority? I have been told that a certain noble lord, who once sat himself down to write a pamphlet in behalf of a great minister, after taking infinite pains to no purpose to find a Latin motto, gave commission to a friend of his to offer to any one, who could help him to a suitable one, but of 1 or 2 lines, a hamper of claret. Accordingly his lordship had a motto found him from Juvenal, which he, unhappily mistaking, not knowing Juvenal was a poet, printed as a prose sentence in his title page. If then 1 or 2 lines were of so much worth, a hamper of claret no less, of what inestimable value would such a letter as mine be deemed? And who knoweth but that this noble peer, who is now living, if he should happen to see this letter shining with such a glorious string of jewels, might give the writer a scarf, in order to have him always at hand, or be a mean, some way or other, to bring him into notice? I would be bold to say, bad as the world is, a man of sound learning wanteth nothing but an initiation to make his fortune. I hope, my good friend, that the lady will not die. I shall be much grieved if she doth, and the more because of mine unhappy misrepresentation. So will you for the same cause. So will her parents and friends. They are very rich and very worthy gentlefolks. But let me tell you, by the by, that they had carried the matter against her so far, that I believe in my heart they were glad to justify themselves by my report, and would have been less pleased had I made a more favourable one. And yet in their hearts they dote upon her. But now they are all, as I hear, inclined to be friends with her, and forgive her, her brother as well as the rest. But their cousin, Colonel Morden, a very fine gentleman, had had such high words with them, and they with him, that they know not how to stoop, lest it should look like being frighted into an accommodation. Hence it is, that I, having taken the greater liberty to press the reconciliation, and I hope in such good season, that they will all be pleased with it. For can they have a better handle to save their pride all round, than by my mediation? And let me tell you, inter nos, betwixt ourselves, very proud they all are. By this honest means, for by dishonest ones I would not be Archbishop of Canterbury, I hope to please every body, to be forgiven in the first place by the lady, whom being a lover of learning and learned men, I shall have great opportunities of obliging. For when she departed from her father's house, I had but just the honour of her notice, and she seemed highly pleased with my conversation, and next to be thanked and respected by her parents, and all her family, as I am, I bless God for it, by my dear friend Mr. John Harlowe, who indeed is a man that professeth a great esteem for men of erudition, and who, with singular delight, I know, will run over with me the authorities I have quoted, and wonder at my memory, and the happy knack I have of recommending mine own sense of things in the words of the greatest sages of antiquity. Excuse me, my good friend, for this seeming vanity. The great Cicero, you must have heard, I suppose, had a much greater spice of it, and wrote a long letter begging and praying to be flattered. But if I say less of myself than other people who know me say of me, I think I keep a medium between vanity and false modesty, the latter of which oftentimes gives itself the lie, when it is declaring of the compliments that every body gives it as its due, and hypocrisy as well as folly that, I hope, I shall for ever scorn to be guilty of. I have another reason, as I may tell to you, my old schoolfellow, to make me wish for this fine lady's recovery and health, and that is, by some distant intimations I have heard from Mr. John Harlowe, that it is very likely, because of the slur she hath received, that she will choose to live privately and penitently, and will probably, when she cometh into her estate, keep a chaplain, to direct her in her devotions and penitence. If she doth, who can stand a better chance than myself? And as I find by your account, as well as by every body's, that she is innocent as to intention, and is resolved never to think of Mr. Lovelace more, who knoweth what, in time, may happen? And yet it must be after Mr. Lovelace's death, which may possibly sooner happen than he thinketh of, by means of his detestable courses. For, after all, a man who is of public utility ought not, for the finest woman in the world, to lay his throat at the mercy of a man who boggleth at nothing. I beseech you, let not this hint go further than to yourself, your spouse, and Mrs. Barker. I know I may trust my life in your hands, and theirs. There have been, let me tell ye, unlikelier things come to pass, and that with rich widows, some of quality truly, whose choice in their first marriages hath perhaps been guided by motives of convenience, or mere corporalities, as I may say, but who by their second have had for their view the corporal and spiritual mingled, which is the most eligible, no doubt, to substance composed of both, as men and women are. Nor think, Sir, that should such a thing come to pass, either would be disgraced, since the lady in me would marry a gentleman and a scholar, and as to mine own honour, as the slur would bring her high fortunes down to an equivalence with my mean ones, if fortune only, and not merit, be considered, so hath not the life of this lady been so tainted, either by length of time, or naughtiness of practice, as to put on a foot with the cast abigails that, too often, God knoweth, are thought good enough for a young clergyman who perhaps is drawn in by a poor benefice, and, if the wicked one be not quite worn out, groweth poorer and poorer upon it, by an increase of family, he knoweth not whether is most his, or his noble, ignoble, I should say, patrons. But all this apart, and in confidence. I know you made at school but a small progress in languages, so I have restrained myself from many illustrations from the classics that I could have filled this letter with, as I have done the enclosed one, and being at a distance I cannot explain them to you as I do to my friend Mr. John Harlowe, and who after all is obliged to me for pointing out to him many beauties of the authors I quote, which otherwise would lie concealed from him, as they must from every common observer. But this too inter nos, for he would not take it well to have it known. Jays, you know, old schoolfellow, jays, you know, will strut in peacock's feathers. But whither am I running? I never know where to end, when I get upon learned topics; and albeit I cannot compliment you with the name of a learned man, yet are you a sensible man, and, as such, must have pleasure in learned men and in their writings. In this confidence, Mr. Walton, with my kind respects to the good ladies, your spouse and sister, and in hopes for the young lady's sake soon to follow this long epistle in person, I conclude myself your loving and faithful friend, Elias Brand. You will perhaps, Mr. Walton, wonder at the meaning of the lines drawn under many of the words and sentences. Underscoring, we call it, and were my letters to be printed, those would be put in a different character. Now you must know, Sir, that we learned men do this to point out to the readers, who are not so learned, where the jet of our arguments lieth, and the emphasis they are to lay upon those words, whereby they will take in readily our sense and cogency. Some pragmatical people have said, that an author who doth a great deal of this, either calleth his readers fools, or tacitly condemneth his own style, as supposing his meaning would be dark without it, or that all of his force lay in words. But all of those with whom I have conversed in a learned way, think as I think. And to give a very pretty, though familiar illustration, I have considered a page, distinguished by different characters, as a verdant field, overspread with butterflowers, and daisies, and other summer flowers. These the poems liken to enamelling. Have you not read in the poets of enamelled meads, and so forth? End of letter 65. Letter 66 of Clarissa Harlowe, or The History of a Young Lady, Volume 8. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nicole Lee. Clarissa Harlowe, or The History of a Young Lady, Volume 8, by Samuel Richardson. Letter 66. Mr. Brand, to John Harlowe, Esq. Saturday night, September 2nd. Worthy Sir, I am under no small concern that I should unhappily be the occasion, I am sure I intended nothing like it, of widening differences by light misreport, when it is the duty of one of my function, and no less consisting with my inclination, to heal and reconcile. I have received 2 letters to set me right, one from a particular acquaintance, whom I set to inquire of Mr. Belford's character, and that came on Tuesday last, informing me that your unhappy niece was greatly injured in the account I had had of her; for I had told him of it, and that with very great concern, I am sure, apprehending it to be true. So I then set about writing to you to acknowledge the error, and had gone a good way in it, when the second letter came, a very handsome one it is, both in style and penmanship, from my friend Mr. Walton, though I am sure it cannot be his inditing, expressing his sorrow, and his wife's, and his sister-in-law's likewise, for having been the cause of misleading me in the account I gave of the said young lady, whom they now say, upon further inquiry, they find to be the most unblameable, and most prudent, and, it seems, the most pious young lady that ever once committed a great error, as to be sure hers was, in leaving such worthy parents and relations for so vile a man as Mr. Lovelace. But what shall we say? Why, the divine Virgil tells us, improbe amor, quid non mortalia pectora cogis. For my part, I was but too much afraid, for we have great opportunities, you are sensible, Sir, at the University, of knowing human nature from books, the calm result of the wise man's wisdom, as I may say, haurit aquam cribro, qui discere vult sine libro, uninterrupted by the noise and vanities that will mingle with personal conversation, which, in the turbulent world, is not to be enjoyed but over a bottle, where you have 100 foolish things passed to one that deserveth to be remembered. I was but too much afraid, I say, that so great a slip might be attended with still greater and worse. For your Horace, and my Horace, the most charming writer that ever lived among the pagans, for the lyric kind of poetry, I mean, for, to be sure, Homer and Virgil would otherwise be first named in their way, well observeth, and who understood human nature better than he, nec vera virtus, cum semel excidit, curat reponi deterioribus. And Ovid no less wisely observeth, et mala sunt vicina bonis, errore sub illo, pro vitio virtus crimina saepe tulit. Who that can draw knowledge from its fountainhead, the works of the sages of antiquity, improved by the comments of the moderns, but would prefer to all others the silent quiet life which contemplative men lead in the seats of learning, were they not called out according to their dedication to the service and instruction of the world? Now, Sir, another favourite poet of mine, and not the less a favourite for being a Christian, telleth us, that ill is the custom of some, when in a fault, to throw the blame upon the backs of others. Hominum quoque mos est, quae nos cumque premunt, alieno imponere tergo. Mant. But I, though in this case misled, well intendedly, nevertheless, both in the misleaders and misled, and therefore entitled to lay hold of that plea, if any body is so entitled, will not, however, be classed among such extenuators, but, contrarily, will always keep in mind that verse which comforteth in mistake, as well as instructeth, and which I quoted in my last letter, errare est hominis, sed non persistere, and will own that I was very rash to take up with conjectures and consequences drawn from probabilities where especially the character of so fine a lady was concerned. Credere fallacy gravis est dementia fame. Mant. Notwithstanding Miss Clarissa Harlowe, I must be bold to say, is the only young lady that ever I heard of, or indeed read of, that, having made such a false step, so soon, of her own accord, as I may say, recovered herself, and conquered her love of the deceiver, a great conquest indeed, and who flieth him, and resolveth to die rather than to be his, which now, to her never dying honour, I am well assured, is the case, and in justice to her, I am now ready to take to myself, with no small vexation, that of Ovid, heu patior tellis vulnera facta meis. But yet I do insist upon it, that all that part of my information, which I took upon mine own personal inquiry, which is what relates to Mr. Belford and his character, is literally true. For there is not any where to be met with a man of a more libertine character, as to women, Mr. Lovelace excepted, than he beareth. And so, Sir, I must desire of you, that you will not let any blame lie upon my intention, since you see how ready I am to accuse myself of too lightly giving ear to a rash information, not knowing it to be so, however, for I depended the more upon it, as the people I had it from are very sober, and live in the fear of God, and indeed, when I wait upon you, you will see by their letter that they must be conscientious good people. Wherefore, Sir, let me be entitled, from all your good family, to that of my last named poet. Aspera confesso verba remite reo. And now, Sir, what is much more becoming of my function, let me, instead of appearing with the face of an accuser, and a rash censurer, which in my heart I have not deserved to be thought, assume the character of a reconciler, and propose, by way of penance to myself for my fault, to be sent up as a messenger of peace to the pious young lady: for they write me word absolutely, and I believe in my heart truly, that the doctors have given her over, and that she cannot live. Alas! alas! what a sad thing would that be, if the poor bough, that was only designed, as I very well know, and am fully assured, to be bent, should be broken! Let it not, dear Sir, seem to the world, that there was any thing in your resentments, which, while meant for reclaiming, were just and fit, that hath the appearance of violence, and fierce wrath, and inexorability, as it would look to some, if carried to extremity after repentance, and contrition, and humiliation, on the fair offender's side. For all this while, it seemeth, she hath been a second Magdalen in her penitence, and yet not so bad as a Magdalen in her faults. Faulty, nevertheless, as she hath been once, the Lord knoweth. Nam vitiis nemo, sine nascitur, optimus ille est, qui minimis urgentur, saith Horace. Now, Sir, if I may be named for this blessed employment, for blessed is the peacemaker, I will hasten to London; and as I know Miss had always a great regard to the function I have the honour to be of, I have no doubt of making myself acceptable to her, and to bring her by sound arguments and good advice into a liking of life, which must be the first step to her recovery: for when the mind is made easy, the body will not long suffer; and the love of life is a natural passion that is soon revived when fortune turneth about and smileth. Vivere quisque diu, quam vis et egenus et ager optat. Ovid. And the sweet Lucan truly observeth, Fatis debentibus annos, mors invita subit. And now, Sir, let me tell you what shall be the tenor of my pleadings with her, and comfortings of her, as she is, as I may say, a learned lady, and as I can explain to her those sentences which she cannot so readily construe herself; and this in order to convince you, did you not already know my qualifications, how well qualified I am for the Christian office to which I commend myself. I will, in the first place, put her in mind of the common course of things in this sublunary world, in which joy, and sorrow, and joy, succeed one another by turns, in order to convince her that her griefs have been but according to that common course of things, gaudia post luctus veniunt, post gaudia luctus. Secondly, I will remind her of her own notable description of sorrow, whence she was once called upon to distinguish wherein sorrow, grief, and melancholy differed from each other, which she did impromptu by their effects in a truly admirable manner, to the high satisfaction of every one. I myself could not, by study, have distinguished better, nor more concisely. Sorrow, said she, wears; grief tears; but melancholy soothes. My inference to her shall be, that since a happy reconciliation will take place, grief will be banished, sorrow dismissed, and only sweet melancholy remain to soothe and indulge her contrite heart, and show to all the world the penitent sense she hath of her great error. Thirdly, that her joys, when restored to health and favour, will be the greater, the deeper her griefs were. Joy, let me here observe, my dear Sir, by way of note, is not absolutely inconsistent with melancholy. A soft, gentle joy; not a rapid, not a rampant joy, however; but such a joy as shall lift her temporarily out of her soothing melancholy, and then let her down gently into it again: for melancholy, to be sure, her reflection will generally make to be her state. Gaudia, quae multo parta labore placent. Fourthly, that having really been guilty of a great error, she should not take impatiently the correction and anger with which she hath been treated. Leniter ex merito quicquid patiare ferundum est. Fifthly, that virtue must be established by patience, as saith Prudentius, haec virtus vidua est, quam non patientia firmat. Sixthly, that in the words of Horace she may expect better times than of late she had reason to look for. Grata superveniet, quae non sperabitur hora. Seventhly, that she is really now in a way to be happy, since, according to Ovid, she can count up all her woe. Felix, qui patitur, quae numerare potest. And those comforting lines, Esque serena dies post longos gratior imbres, et post triste malum gratior ipsa salus. Eighthly, that in the words of Mantuan, her parents and uncles could not help loving her all the time they were angry at her. Aqua tamen mens est, et amica voluntas, sit licet in natos austere parentum. Ninthly, that the ills she hath met with may be turned, by the good use to be made of them, to her everlasting benefit, for that, cum fuit atque ferit, Deus olim parcere quaerit. Tenthly, that she will be able to give a fine lesson, a very fine lesson, to all the young ladies of her acquaintance, of the vanity of being lifted up in prosperity, and the weakness of being cast down in adversity, since no one is so high as to be above being humbled, so low as to need to despair, for which purpose the advice of Ausonius, dum fortuna juvat, caveto tolli, dum fortuna tonat, caveto mergi. I shall tell her that Lucan saith well, when he calleth adversity the element of patience, gaudet patientia duris, that fortunam superat virtus, prudential famam, that while weak souls are crushed by fortune, the brave mind maketh the fickle deity afraid of it. Fortuna fortes metuit, ignavos permit. Eleventhly, that if she take the advice of Horace, fortiaque adversis apponite pectora rebus, it will delight her hereafter, as Virgil saith, to revoke her past troubles, forsan et haec olim meminisse juvabit. And to the same purpose, Juvenal, speaking of the prating joy of mariners after all their dangers are over, gaudent securi narrare pericula nautae, which suiting the case so well, you'll forgive me, Sir, for popping down in English metre, as the translative impulse. Pardon a new word, and yet we scholars are not fond of authenticating new words, came upon me uncalled for. The seaman, safe on shore, with joy doth tell what cruel dangers him at sea befell. With these, Sir, and 100 more wise adages, which I have always at my finger's end, will I, when reduced to form and method, entertain Miss, and as she is a well-read, and, I might say, but for this one great error, a wise young lady, I make no doubt but I shall prevail upon her, if not by mine own arguments, by those of wits and capacities that have a congeniality, as I may say, to her own, to take to heart. Nor of the laws of fate complain, since, though it has been cloudy, now it clears up again. Oh, what wisdom is there in these noble classical authors! A wise man will, upon searching into them, always find that they speak his sense of men and things. Hence it is, that they so readily occur to my memory on every occasion. Though this may look like vanity, it is too true to be omitted. And I see not why a man may not know these things of himself, which every body seeth and saith of him, who nevertheless perhaps knows not half so much as he in other matters. I know but of one objection, Sir, that can lie against my going, and that will arise from your kind care and concern for the safety of my person, in case that fierce and terrible man, the wicked Mr. Lovelace, of whom every one standeth in fear, should come cross me, as he may be resolved to try once more to gain a footing in Mrs. affections. But I will trust in Providence for my safety, while I shall be engaged in a cause so worthy of my function, and the more trust in it, as he is a learned man, as I am told. Strange, too, that so vile a rake, I hope he will never see this, should be a learned man, that is to say, that a learned man may be a sly sinner, and take opportunities as they come in his way, which, however, I do assure you, I never did. I repeat, that as he is a learned man, I shall vest myself, as I may say, in classical armour, beginning meekly with him; for, Sir, bravery and meekness are qualities very consistent with each other, and in no person so shiningly exert themselves as in the Christian priesthood; beginning meekly with him, I say, from Ovid. Corpora magnanimo satis est protrasse leoni. So that if I should not be safe behind the shield of mine own prudence, I certainly should be behind the shields of the ever admirable classics, of Horace particularly, who being a rake, and a jovial rake too, himself, must have great weight with all learned rakes, and who knoweth but I may be able to bring even this Goliath in wickedness, although in person but a little David myself, armed with the slings and stones of the ancient sages, to a due sense of his errors? And what a victory would that be! I could here, Sir, pursuing the allegory of David and Goliath, give you some of the stones (hard arguments may be called stones, since they knock down a pertinacious opponent) which I could pelt him with, were he to be wroth with me: and this in order to take from you, Sir, all apprehensions for my life or my bones: but I forbear them till you demand them of me, when I have the honour to attend you in person. And now, my dear Sir, what remaineth, but that having shown you, what yet I believe you did not doubt, how well qualified I am to attend the lady with the olive branch, I beg of you to dispatch me with it out of hand: for if she be so very ill, and if she should not live to receive the grace which to my knowledge all the worthy family design her, how much will that grieve you all! And then, Sir, of what avail will be the eulogies you shall all peradventure join to give to her memory? For as Martial wisely observeth, post cineres gloria sera venit. Then as Ausonius layeth it down with equal propriety, that those favours which are speedily conferred are the most grateful and obliging. And to the same purpose Ovid, gratia ab officio, quod mora tardat abest. And, Sir, whatever you do, let the lady's pardon be as ample, and as cheerfully given, as she can wish for it, that I may be able to tell her that it hath your hands, your countenances, and your whole hearts with it: for as the Latin verse hath it, and I presume to think I have not weakened its sense by my humble advice, dat bene, dat multum, qui dat cum munere vultum. And now, Sir, when I survey this long letter, albeit I see it enamelled as a beautiful meadow is enamelled by the spring or summer flowers, very glorious to behold, I begin to be afraid that I may have tired you; and the more likely as I have written without that method or order, which I think constituteth the beauty of good writing; which method or order, nevertheless, may be the better excused in a familiar epistle, as this may be called, you pardoning, Sir, the familiarity of the word, but yet not altogether here, I must needs own, because this is a letter, and not a letter, as I may say, but a kind of short and pithy discourse, touching upon various and sundry topics, every one of which might be a fit theme to enlarge upon of volumes. If this epistolary discourse, then let me call it, should be pleasing to you, as I am inclined to think it will, because of the sentiments and aphorisms of the wisest of the ancients, which glitter through it like so many dazzling sunbeams, I will at my leisure work it up into a methodical discourse, and perhaps may one day print it, with a dedication to my honoured patron, if, Sir, I have your leave, singly at first, but not till I have thrown out anonymously 2 or 3 smaller things, by the success of which I shall have made myself of some account in the commonwealth of letters, and afterwards in my works. Not for the vanity of the thing, however, I will say, but for the use it may be of to the public: for, as one well observeth, though glory always followeth virtue, yet it should be considered only as its shadow. And here, by way of note, permit me to say that no sermon I ever composed cost me half the pains that this letter hath done: but I knew your great appetite after, as well as admiration of, the ancient wisdom, which you so justly prefer to the modern: and indeed I join with you to think that the modern is only borrowed, as the moon doth its light from the sun; at least, that we excel them in nothing, and that our best cogitations may be found, generally speaking, more elegantly dressed and expressed by them. Contemnit laudem virtus, licet usque sequatur, gloria virtutem corpus ut umbra suum. A very pretty saying, and worthy of all men's admiration. And now, most worthy Sir, my very good friend and patron, referring the whole to yours, and to your 2 brothers, and to young Mr. Harlowe's consideration, and to the wise consideration of good Madam Harlowe, and her excellent daughter Miss Arabella Harlowe, I take the liberty to subscribe myself what I truly am, and ever shall delight to be, in all cases, and at all times, your and their most ready and obedient, as well as faithful servant, Elias Brand. End of Letter 66. Letter 67 of Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 8. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nicole Lee. Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 8, by Samuel Richardson. Letter 67. Mr. Lovelace, to John Belford, Esq. Wednesday morning, September 6th. And is she somewhat better? Blessings upon thee without number or measure! Let her still be better and better! Tell me so at least, if she be not so. For thou knowest not what a joy that poor temporary reprieve, that she will hold out yet a day or two, gave me. But who told this hard-hearted and death-pronouncing doctor that she will hold it no longer? By what warrant says he this? What presumption in these parading solemn fellows of a college, which will be my contempt to the latest hour of my life, if this brother of it, eminent as he is deemed to be, cannot work an ordinary miracle in her favour, or rather in mine? Let me tell thee, Belford, that already he deserves the utmost contempt for suffering this charming clock to run down so low. What must be his art, if it could not wind it up in a quarter of the time he has attended her, when, at his first visits, the springs and wheels of life and motion were so good, that they seemed only to want common care and oiling? I am obliged to you for endeavouring to engage her to see me. 'Twas acting like a friend. If she had vouchsafed me that favour, she should have seen at her feet the most abject adorer that ever kneeled to justly offended beauty. What she bid you, and what she forbid you, to tell me, the latter for tender considerations, that she forgives me, and that, could she have made me a good man, she would have made me a happy one, that she even loved me, at such a moment to own that she once loved me, never before loved any man, that she prays for me, that her last tear should be shed for me, could she by it save a soul doomed without her to perdition. O Belford, Belford, I cannot bear it! What a dog, what a devil have I been to a goodness so superlative? Why does she not inveigh against me? Why does she not execrate me? O the triumphant subduer! Ever above me, and now to leave me so infinitely below her! Marry and repair at any time, this, wretch that I was my plea to myself, to give her a lowering sensibility, to bring her down from among the stars which her beamy head was surrounded by, that my wife, so greatly above me, might not despise me. This was one of my reptile motives, owing to my more reptile envy, and to my consciousness of inferiority to her. Yet she, from step to step, from distress to distress, to maintain her superiority, and like the sun to break out upon me with the greater refulgence for the clouds that I had contrived to cast about her. And now to escape me thus! No power left me to repair her wrongs, no alleviation to my self-reproach, no dividing of blame with her. Tell her, O tell her, Belford, that her prayers and wishes, her superlatively generous prayers and wishes, shall not be vain; that I can and do repent, and long have repented. Tell her of my frequent deep remorses. It was impossible that such remorses should not at last produce effectual remorse. Yet she must not leave me. She must live, if she would wish to have my contrition perfect. For what can despair produce? I will do every thing you would have me do, in the return of your letters. You have infinitely obliged me by this last, and by pressing for an admission for me, though it succeeded not. Once more, how could I be such a villain to so divine a creature, yet love her all the time as never man loved woman? Curse upon my contriving genius! Curse upon my intriguing head, and upon my seconding heart! To sport with the fame, with the honour, with the life of such an angel of a woman! O my damned incredulity! That, believing her to be a woman, I must hope to find her a woman! On my incredulity, that there could be such virtue, virtue for virtue's sake in the sex, founded I my hope of succeeding with her. But say not, Jack, that she must leave us yet. If she recover, and if I can but re-obtain her favour, then indeed will life be life to me. The world never saw such an husband as I will make. I will have no will but hers. She shall conduct me in all my steps. She shall open and direct my prospects, and turn every motion of my heart as she pleases. You tell me in your letter, that at 11 o'clock she had sweet rest; and my servant acquaints me from Mrs. Smith that she has had a good night. What hopes does this fill me with? I have given the fellow 5 guineas for his good news, to be divided between him and his fellow servant. Dear, dear Jack, confirm this to me in thy next. For heaven's sake, do. Tell the doctor I'll make a present of 1,000 guineas, if he recover her. Ask if a consultation then be necessary. Adieu, dear Belford. Confirm, I beseech thee, the hopes that now, with sovereign gladness, have taken possession of a heart that, next to hers, is thine. End of Letter 67. Letter 68 of Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Vol. 8. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nicole Lee. Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 8, by Samuel Richardson. Letter 68. Mr. Belford to Robert Lovelace, Esq. Wednesday morning, 8 o'clock, 6 September. Your servant arrived here before I was stirring. I sent him to Smith's to inquire how the lady was, and ordered him to call upon me when he came back. I was pleased to hear she had tolerable rest. As soon as I had dispatched him with the letter I had written over night, I went to attend her. I found her up and dressed in a white satin night gown, ever elegant, but now more so than I had seen her for a week past. Her aspect serenely cheerful. She mentioned the increased dimness of her eyes, and the tremor which had invaded her limbs. If this be dying, said she, there is nothing at all shocking in it. My body hardly sensible of pain. My mind at ease, my intellects clear and perfect as ever. What a good and gracious God have I! For this is what I always prayed for. I told her it was not so serene with you. There is not the same reason for it, replied she. 'Tis a choice comfort, Mr. Belford, at the winding up of our short story, to be able to say, I have rather suffered injuries myself, than offered them to others. I bless God, though I have been unhappy, as the world deems it, and once I thought more so than at present I think I ought to have done, since my calamities were to work out for me my everlasting happiness, yet have I not wilfully made any one creature so. I have no reason to grieve for any thing but for the sorrow I have given my friends. But pray, Mr. Belford, remember me in the best manner to my cousin Morden, and desire him to comfort them, and to tell them, that all would have been the same, had they accepted of my true penitence, as I wish and as I trust the Almighty has done. I was called down. It was to Harry, who was just returned from Miss Howe's, to whom he carried the lady's letter. The stupid fellow being bid to make haste with it, and return as soon as possible, stayed not until Miss Howe had it, she being at the distance of 5 minutes, although Mrs. Howe would have had him stay, and sent a man and horse purposely with it to her daughter. Wednesday morning, 10 o'clock. The poor lady is just recovered from a fainting fit, which has left her at death's door. Her late tranquillity and freedom from pain seem but a lightening, as Mrs. Lovick and Mrs. Smith call it. By my faith, Lovelace, I had rather part with all the friends I have in the world, than with this lady. I never knew what a virtuous, a holy friendship, as I may call mine to her, was before. But to be so new to it, and to be obliged to forego it so soon, what an affliction! Yet, thank Heaven, I lose her not by my own fault. But 'twould be barbarous not to spare thee now. She has sent for the divine who visited her before, to pray with her. End of Letter 68. Letter 69 of Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 8. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nicole Lee. Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 8, by Samuel Richardson. Letter 69. Mr. Lovelace to John Belford, Esq. Kensington, Wednesday noon. Like Aesop's traveller, thou blowest hot and cold, life and death, in the same breath, with a view, no doubt, to distract me. How familiarly dost thou use the words dying, dimness, tremor! Never did any mortal ring so many changes on so few bells. Thy true father, I dare swear, was a butcher or an undertaker, by the delight thou seemest to take in scenes of death and horror. Thy barbarous reflection, that thou losest her not by thy own fault, is never to be forgiven. Thou hast but one way to atone for the torments thou hast given me, and that is by sending me word that she is better and will recover. Whether it be true or not, let me be told so, and I will go abroad rejoicing and believing it, and my wishes and imagination shall make out all the rest. If she live but 1 year, that I may acquit myself to myself, no matter for the world, that her death is not owing to me, I will compound for the rest. Will neither vows nor prayers save her? I never prayed in my life, put all the years of it together, as I have done for this fortnight past, and I have most sincerely repented of all my baseness to her, and will nothing do. But after all, if she recovers not, this reflection must be my comfort, and it is truth, that her departure will be owing rather to wilfulness, to downright female wilfulness, than to any other cause. It is difficult for people, who pursue the dictates of a violent resentment, to stop where first they design to stop. I have the charity to believe, that even James and Arabella Harlowe, at first, intended no more by the confederacy they formed against this their angel sister, than to disgrace and keep her down, lest, sordid wretches, their uncles should follow the example their grandfather had set, to their detriment. So this lady, as I suppose, intended only at first to vex and plague me, and finding she could do it to purpose, her desire of revenge insensibly became stronger in her than the desire of life. And now she is willing to die, as an event which she thinks will cut my heartstrings asunder; and still, the more to be revenged, puts on the Christian, and forgives me. But I'll have none of her forgiveness. My own heart tells me I do not deserve it, and I cannot bear it. And what is it but a mere verbal forgiveness, as ostentatiously as cruelly given with a view to magnify herself, and wound me deeper? A little, dear, specious but let me stop, lest I blaspheme. Reading over the above, I am ashamed of my ramblings. But what wouldest have me do? Seest thou not that I am but seeking to run out of myself, in hope to lose myself, yet that I am unable to do either? If ever thou lovest but half so fervently as I love, but of that thy heavy soul is not capable. Send me word by the next, I conjure thee, in the names of all her kindred saints and angels, that she is living and likely to live. If thou sendest ill news, thou wilt be answerable for the consequences, whether it be fatal to the messenger, or to thy Lovelace. End of Letter 69. Letter 70 of Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 8. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nicole Lee. Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 8, by Samuel Richardson. Letter 70. Mr. Belford to Robert Lovelace, Esq. Wednesday, 11 o'clock. Dr. H. has just been here. He tarried with me till the minister had done praying by the lady, and then we were both admitted. Mr. Goddard, who came while the doctor and the clergyman were with her, went away with them when they went. They took a solemn and everlasting leave of her, as I have no scruple to say, blessing her and being blessed by her, and wishing, when it came to be their lot, for an exit as happy as hers is likely to be. She had again earnestly requested of the doctor his opinion, how long it was now probable that she could continue; and he told her that he apprehended she would hardly see to-morrow night. She said, she should number the hours with greater pleasure than ever she numbered any in her life on the most joyful occasion. How unlike poor Belton's last hours hers! See the infinite differences in the effects, on the same awful and affecting occasion, between a good and a bad conscience. This moment a man is come from Miss Howe with a letter. Perhaps I shall be able to send you the contents. She endeavoured several times with earnestness, but in vain, to read the letter of her dear friend. The writing, she said, was too fine for her grosser sight, and the lines staggered under her eye. And indeed she trembled so, she could not hold the paper; and at last desired Mrs. Lovick to read it to her, the messenger waiting for an answer. Thou wilt see in Miss Howe's letter how different the expression of the same impatience and passionate love is, when dictated by the gentler mind of a woman, from that which results from a mind so boisterous and knotty as thine. For Mrs. Lovick will transcribe it, and I shall send it, to be read in this place, if thou wilt. Miss Howe to Miss Clarissa Harlowe. Tuesday, September 5th. O my dearest friend, what will become of your poor Anna Howe? I see by your writing, as well as read by your own account, which, were you not very, very ill, you would have touched more tenderly, how it is with you. Why have I thus long delayed to attend you? Could I think that the comfortings of a faithful friend were as nothing to a gentle mind in distress, that I could be prevailed upon to forbear visiting you so much as once in all this time? I, as well as every body else, to desert and abandon my dear creature to strangers! What will become of you, if you be as bad as my apprehensions make you? I will set out this moment, little as the encouragement is that you give me to do so. My mother is willing I should. Why, oh why was she not before willing? Yet she persuades me too, lest I should be fatally affected were I to find my fears too well justified, to wait the return of this messenger, who rides our swiftest horse. God speed him with good news to me. One line from your hand by him. Send me but one line to bid me attend you. I will set out the moment, the very moment I receive it. I am now actually ready to do so; and if you love me, as I love you, the sight of me will revive you to my hopes. But why, when I think this, did I not go up sooner? Blessed Heaven! Deny not to my prayers, my friend, my admonisher, my adviser, at a time so critical to myself. But, methinks, your style and sentiments are too well connected, too full of life and vigour, to give cause for so much despair as thy staggering pen seems to forebode. I am sorry I was not at home. I must add thus much, though the servant is ready mounted at the door. When Mr. Belford's servant came with your affecting letter, I was at Miss Lloyd's. My mamma sent it to me, and I came home that instant. But he was gone. He would not stay, it seems. Yet I wanted to ask him 100,000 questions. But why delay I thus my messenger? I have a multitude of things to say to you, to advise with you about. You shall direct me in every thing. I will obey the holding up of your finger. But, if you leave me, what is this world, or any thing in it, to your Anna Howe? The effect this letter had on the lady, who is so near the end which the fair writer so much apprehends and deplores, obliged Mrs. Lovick to make many breaks in reading it, and many changes of voice. This is a friend, said the divine lady, taking the letter in her hand and kissing it, worth wishing to live for. O my dear Anna Howe! How uninterruptedly sweet and noble has been our friendship! But we shall one day meet, and this hope must comfort us both, never to part again. Then, divested of the shades of body, shall be all light and all mind. Then how unalloyed, how perfect will be our friendship! Our love then will have one and the same adorable object, and we shall enjoy it and each other to all eternity. She said, her dear friend was so earnest for a line or two, that she fain would write, if she could. And she tried, but to no purpose. She could dictate, however, she believed, and desired Mrs. Lovick would take pen and paper, which she did, and then she dictated to her. I would have withdrawn, but at her desire stayed. She wondered a good deal at first. She took notice that she did. And when she got into a little train, not pleasing herself, she apologized to Mrs. Lovick for making her begin again and again, and said, that the third time should go, let it be as it would. She dictated the farewell part without hesitation, and when she came to blessing and subscription, she took the pen, and dropping on her knees, supported by Mrs. Lovick, wrote the conclusion. But Mrs. Lovick was forced to guide her hand. You will find the sense surprisingly entire, her weakness considered. I made the messenger wait while I transcribed it. I have endeavoured to imitate the subscriptive part, and in the letter made pauses where, to the best of my remembrance, she paused. In nothing that relates to this admirable lady can I be too minute. Wednesday, near 3 o'clock. My dearest Miss Howe, you must not be surprised, nor grieved, that Mrs. Lovick writes for me. Although I cannot obey you and write with my pen, yet my heart writes by hers. Accept it so. It is the nearest to obedience I can. And now, what ought I to say? What can I say? But why should not you know the truth, since soon you must, very soon? Know then, and let your tears be those, if of pity, of joyful pity, for I permit you to shed a few, to embalm, as I may say, a fallen blossom. Know then, that the good doctor, and the pious clergyman, and the worthy apothecary, have just now, with joint benedictions, taken their last leave of me. And the former bids me hope. Do, my dearest, let me say, hope. Hope for my enlargement before to-morrow's sunset. Adieu, therefore, my dearest friend. Be this your consolation, as it is mine, that in God's good time we shall meet in a blessed eternity, never more to part. Once more then, adieu. And be happy, which a generous nature cannot be, unless, to its power, it makes others so too. God for ever bless you. Praise, dropt on my bended knees, although supported upon them, your obliged, grateful, affectionate, Clarissa Harlowe. When I had transcribed and sealed this letter by her direction, I gave it to the messenger myself, who told me that Miss Howe waited for nothing but his return to set out for London. Thy servant is just come, so I will close here. Thou art a merciless master. These two fellows are battered to death by thee, to use a female word. And all female words, though we are not sure of their derivation, have very significant meanings. I believe in their hearts they wish the angel in the heaven that is ready to receive her, and thee at the proper place, that there might be an end of their flurries. Another word of the same gender. What a letter hast thou sent me, poor Lovelace, is all the answer I will return. 5 o'clock. Colonel Morden is this moment arrived. End of Letter 70. Letter 71 of Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 8. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nicole Lee. Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 8, by Samuel Richardson. Letter 71. Mr. Belford, in continuation, 8 in the evening. I had but just time in my former to tell you that Colonel Morden was arrived. He was on horseback, attended by 2 servants, and alighted at the door just as the clock struck 5. Mrs. Smith was then below in her back shop, weeping, her husband with her, who was as much affected as she. Mrs. Lovick having left them a little before, in tears likewise, for they had been bemoaning one another, joining in opinion that the admirable lady would not live the night over. She had told them it was her opinion too, from some numbnesses, which she called the forerunners of death, and from an increased inclination to doze. The Colonel, as Mrs. Smith told me afterwards, asked with great impatience, the moment he alighted, how Miss Harlowe was. She answered, alive; but she feared, drawing on apace. Good God! said he, with his hands and eyes lifted up, can I see her? My name is Morden. I have the honour to be nearly related to her. Step up, pray, and let her know she is sensible, I hope, that I am here. Who is with her? Nobody but her nurse, and Mrs. Lovick, a widow gentlewoman, who is as careful of her as if she were her mother. And more careful too, interrupted he, or she is not careful at all. Except a gentleman be with her, one Mr. Belford, continued Mrs. Smith, who has been the best friend she has had. If Mr. Belford be with her, surely I may. But pray step up, and let Mr. Belford know that I shall take it for a favour to speak with him first. Mrs. Smith came up to me in my new apartment. I had but just dispatched your servant, and was asking her nurse if I might be again admitted, who answered, that she was dozing in the elbow chair, having refused to lie down, saying she should soon, she hoped, lie down for good. The Colonel, who is really a fine gentleman, received me with great politeness. After the first compliments, my kinswoman, sir, said he, is more obliged to you than to any of her own family. For my part, I have been endeavouring to move so many rocks in her favour, and little thinking the dear creature so very bad, have neglected to attend her, as I ought to have done the moment I arrived, and would, had I known how ill she was, and what a task I should have had with the family. But, sir, your friend has been excessively to blame, and you being so intimately his friend, has made her fare the worse for your civilities to her. But are there no hopes of her recovery? The doctors have left her, with the melancholy declaration that there are none. Has she had good attendance, sir? A skilful physician? I hear these good folks have been very civil and obliging to her. Who could be otherwise? Said Mrs. Smith, weeping. She is the sweetest lady in the world. The character, said the Colonel, lifting up his eyes and one hand, that she has from every living creature. Good God! How could your accursed friend? And how could her cruel parents? Interrupted I. We may as easily account for him as for them. Too true, returned me. The vileness of the profligates of our sex considered, whenever they can get any of the other into their power. I satisfied him about the care that has been taken of her, and told him of the friendly and even paternal attendance she had had from Dr. H. and Mr. Goddard. He was impatient to attend her, having not seen her, as he said, since she was 12 years old, and that then she gave promises of being one of the finest women in England. She was so, replied I, a very few months ago. And though emaciated, she will appear to you to have confirmed those promises; for her features are so regular and exact, her proportions so fine, and her manners so inimitably graceful, that, were she only skin and bone, she must be a beauty. Mrs. Smith, at his request, stept up, and brought us down word that Mrs. Lovick and her nurse were with her, and that she was in so sound a sleep, leaning upon the former in her elbow chair, that she had neither heard her enter the room nor go out. The Colonel begged, if not improper, that he might see her, though sleeping. He said that his impatience would not let him stay till she awaked. Yet he would not have her disturbed, and should be glad to contemplate her sweet features when she saw not him, and asked if she thought he could not go in and come out without disturbing her. She believed he might, she answered, for her chair's back was towards the door. He said he would take care to withdraw if she awoke, that his sudden appearance might not surprise her. Mrs. Smith, stepping up before us, bid Mrs. Lovick and nurse not stir when we entered, and then we went up softly together. We beheld the lady in a charming attitude, dressed, as I told you before, in her virgin white. She was sitting in her elbow chair, Mrs. Lovick close by her, in another chair, with her left arm round her neck, supporting it, as it were, for it seems the lady had bid her do so, saying she had been a mother to her, and she would delight herself in thinking she was in her mamma's arms, for she found herself drowsy. Perhaps, she said, for the last time she should be so. One faded cheek rested upon the good woman's bosom, the kindly warmth of which had overspread it with a faint but charming flush; the other paler and hollow, as if already iced over by death; her hands white as the lily, with her meandering veins more transparently blue than ever I had seen even hers; veins so soon, alas, to be choked up by the congealment of that purple stream, which already so languidly creeps rather than flows through them; her hands hanging lifelessly, one before her, the other grasped by the right hand of the kind widow, whose tears bedewed the sweet face which her motherly bosom supported, though unfelt by the fair sleeper; and either insensibly to the good woman, or what she would not disturb her to wipe off, or to change her posture. Her aspect was sweetly calm and serene, and though she started now and then, yet her sleep seemed easy; her breath indeed short and quick, but tolerably free, and not like that of a dying person. In this heart-moving attitude she appeared to us when we approached her, and came to have her lovely face before us. The Colonel, sighing often, gazed upon her with his arms folded, and with the most profound and affectionate attention; till at last, on her starting and fetching her breath with greater difficulty than before, he retired to a screen that was drawn before her house, as she calls it, which, as I have heretofore observed, stands under one of the windows. This screen was placed there at the time she found herself obliged to take to her chamber; and in the depth of our concern, and the fulness of other discourse at our first interview, I had forgotten to apprize the Colonel of what he would probably see. Retiring thither, he drew out his handkerchief, and, overwhelmed with grief, seemed unable to speak. But on casting his eye behind the screen, he soon broke silence; for, struck with the shape of the coffin, he lifted up a purplish coloured cloth that was spread over it, and starting back, "Good God!" said he, "what's here?" Mrs. Smith, standing next him, "Why," said he, with great emotion, "is my cousin suffered to indulge her sad reflections with such an object before her?" "Alas, Sir," replied the good woman, "who should controul her? We are all strangers about her in a manner, and yet we have expostulated with her upon this sad occasion." "I ought," said I, stepping softly up to him, the lady again falling into a doze, "to have apprized you of this. I was here when it was brought in, and never was so shocked in my life. But she had none of her friends about her, and no reason to hope for any of them to come near her; and assured she should not recover, she was resolved to leave as little as possible, especially as to what related to her person, to her executor. But it is not a shocking object to her, though it be to every body else." "Curse upon the hard-heartedness of those," said he, "who occasioned her to make so sad a provision for herself! What must her reflections have been all the time she was thinking of it, and giving orders about it? And what must they be every time she turns her head towards it? These uncommon geniuses! But indeed she should have been controuled in it, had I been here." The lady fetched a profound sigh, and, starting, it broke off our talk; and the Colonel then withdrew further behind the screen, that his sudden appearance might not surprise her. "Where am I?" said she. "How drowsy I am! How long have I dozed? Don't go, Sir," for I was retiring. "I am very stupid, and shall be more and more so, I suppose." She then offered to raise herself; but being ready to faint through weakness, was forced to sit down again, reclining her head on her chair back. And after a few moments, "I believe now, my good friend," said she, "all your kind trouble will soon be over. I have slept, but am not refreshed, and my fingers' ends seem numbed, have no feeling," holding them up. "'Tis time to send the letter to my good Norton. Shall I, Madam, send my servant post with it?" "Oh, no, Sir, I thank you. It will reach the dear woman too soon, as she will think, by the post." I told her this was not post day. "Is it Wednesday still?" said she. "Bless me! I know not how the time goes. But very tediously 'tis plain. And now I think I must soon take to my bed. All will be most conveniently, and with least trouble, over there. Will it not, Mrs. Lovick? I think, Sir, turning to me, I have left nothing to these last incapacitating hours. Nothing either to say or to do. I bless God I have not. If I had, how unhappy should I be! Can you, Sir, remind me of any thing necessary to be done or said to make your office easy? If, Madam, your cousin Morden should come, you would be glad to see him, I presume. I am too weak to wish to see my cousin now. It would but discompose me, and him too. Yet, if he come while I can see him, I will see him, were it but to thank him for former favours, and for his present kind intentions to me. Has any body been here from him? He has called, and will be here, Madam, in half an hour: but he feared to surprise you. Nothing can surprise me now, except my mamma were to favour me with her last blessing in person. That would be a welcome surprise to me, even yet. But did my cousin come purposely to town to see me? Yes, Madam. I took the liberty to let him know, by a line last Monday, how ill you were. You are very kind, Sir. I am, and have been, greatly obliged to you. But I think I shall be pained to see him now, because he will be concerned to see me. And yet, as I am not so ill as I shall presently be, the sooner he comes the better. But if he come, what shall I do about the screen? He will chide me, very probably, and I cannot bear chiding now. Perhaps, leaning upon Mrs. Lovick and Mrs. Smith, I can walk into the next apartment to receive him. She motioned to rise, but was ready to faint again, and forced to sit still. The Colonel was in a perfect agitation behind the screen to hear this discourse, and twice, unseen by his cousin, was coming from it towards her, but retreated for fear of surprising her too much. I stepped to him, and favoured his retreat, she only saying, "Are you going, Mr. Belford? Are you sent for down? Is my cousin come?" For she heard somebody step softly across the room, and thought it to be me, her hearing being more perfect than her sight. I told her I believed he was; and she said, "We must make the best of it, Mrs. Lovick and Mrs. Smith. I shall otherwise most grievously shock my poor cousin, for he loved me dearly once. Pray give me a few of the doctor's last drops in water, to keep up my spirits for this one interview, and that is all, I believe, that can concern me now." The Colonel, who heard all this, sent in his name; and I, pretending to go down to him, introduced the afflicted gentleman. she having first ordered the screen to be put as close to the window as possible, that he might not see what was behind it, while he, having heard what she had said about it, was determined to take no notice of it. He folded the angel in his arms as she sat, dropping down on one knee; for, supporting herself upon the two elbows of the chair, she attempted to rise, but could not. Excuse, my dear cousin, said she, excuse me that I cannot stand up. I did not expect this favour now. But I am glad of this opportunity to thank you for all your generous goodness to me. I never, my best beloved and dearest cousin, said he, with eyes running over, shall forgive myself that I did not attend you sooner. Little did I think you were so ill, nor do any of your friends believe it, if they did. If they did, repeated she, interrupting him, I should have had more compassion from them. I am sure I should. But pray, sir, how did you leave them? Are you reconciled to them? If you are not, I beg, if you love your poor Clarissa, that you will; for every widened difference augments but my fault, since that is the foundation of all. I had been expecting to hear from them in your favour, my dear cousin, said he, for some hours, when this gentleman's letter arrived, which hastened me up. But I have the account of your grandfather's estate to make up with you, and have bills and drafts upon their banker, for the sums due to you, which they desire you may receive, lest you should have occasion for money. And this is such an earnest of an approaching reconciliation, that I dare to answer for all the rest being according to your wishes, if... Ah, sir, interrupted she, with frequent breaks and pauses, I wish this does not rather show that, were I to live, they would have nothing more to say to me. I never had any pride in being independent of them. All my actions, when I might have made myself more independent, show this. But what avail these reflections now? I only beg, sir, that you and this gentleman, to whom I am exceedingly obliged, will adjust those matters according to the will I have written. Mr. Belford will excuse me; but it was in truth more necessity than choice that made me think of giving him the trouble he so kindly accepts. Had I the happiness to see you, my cousin, sooner, or to know that you still honoured me with your regard, I should not have had the assurance to ask this favour of him. But though the friend of Mr. Lovelace, he is a man of honour, and he will make peace rather than break it. And, my dear cousin, let me beg of you, while I have nearer relations than my cousin Morden, dear as you are, and always were to me, you have no title to avenge my wrongs upon him who has been the occasion of them. But I wrote to you my mind on this subject, and my reasons, and I hope I need not further urge them. I must do Mr. Lovelace so much justice, answered he, wiping his eyes, as to witness how sincerely he repents him of his ungrateful baseness to you, and how ready he is to make you all the amends in his power. He owns his wickedness and your merit. If he did not, I could not pass it over, though you have nearer relations. For, my dear cousin, did not your grandfather leave me in trust for you? And should I think myself concerned for your fortune, and not for your honour? But since he is so desirous to do you justice, I have the less to say, and you may make yourself entirely easy on that account. I thank you, sir, said she. All is now as I wished. But I am very faint, very weak. I am sorry I cannot hold up, that I cannot better deserve the honour of this visit. But it will not be. And saying this, she sunk down in her chair, and was silent. Hereupon we both withdrew, leaving word that we would be at the Bedford Head, if any thing extraordinary happened. We bespoke a little repast, having neither of us dined; and while it was getting ready, you may guess at the subject of our discourse. Both joined in lamentation for the lady's desperate state, admired her manifold excellencies, severely condemned you and her friends. Yet, to bring him into better opinion of you, I read to him some passages from your last letters, which showed your concern for the wrongs you had done her, and your deep remorse; and he said it was a dreadful thing to labour under the sense of a guilt so irredeemable. We procured Mr. Goddard, Dr. H. not being at home, once more to visit her, and to call upon us in his return. He was so good as to do so; but he tarried with her not 5 minutes, and told us that she was drawing on apace, that he feared she would not live till morning, and that she wished to see Colonel Morden directly. The Colonel made excuses where none were needed, and though our little refection was just brought in, he went away immediately. I could not touch a morsel, and took pen and ink to amuse myself, and oblige you, knowing how impatient you would be for a few lines. For, from what I have recited, you see it was impossible I could withdraw to write, when your servant came at half an hour after 5, or have an opportunity for it till now, and this is accidental. And yet your poor fellow was afraid to go away with the verbal message I sent, importing, as no doubt he told you, that the Colonel was with us, the lady excessively ill, and that I could not stir to write a line. 10 o'clock. The Colonel sent to me afterwards, to tell me that the lady having been in convulsions, he was so much disordered that he could not possibly attend me. I have sent every half hour to know how she does; and just now I have the pleasure to hear that her convulsions have left her, and that she is gone to rest in a much quieter way than could be expected. Her poor cousin is very much indisposed. yet will not stir out of the house while she is in such a way; but intends to lie down on a couch, having refused any other accommodation. End of Letter LXXI. End of Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Vol. VIII. by Samuel Richardson.